Is it worth the waiting for? If we live till 84, all we ever get is cruel. Every day we say a prayer. Will they change the bill of fare? Still we get the same old cruel. There's not a crust, not a crumb. Can we find? Can we beg? Can we borrow or cash? But there's nothing to stop us from getting a thrill when we all close our eyes and imagine glorious food, hot sausage and mustard, while we're in the mood, cold jelly and custard, peas, pudding and saveloys. What next is the question? Rich gentlemen having boys, indigestion. Food, we're anxious to try it. 3 banquets a day, our favorite diet. Just picture a great big steak, fried roast veal stew. Food, glorious food. Don't care what it looks like. Burnt, underdone, crude. Don't care what it looks like. Just thinking of growing fat. Our senses are reeling. One moment of knowing that. Full of feeling. Food, glorious food. What good would it give for? That's extra bit more. That's all that we live for. Why should we be created to do nothing but
Our call to community this morning comes from W.E. Du Bois. Now is the accepted time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year. It is today that we fit ourselves for the greater usefulness of tomorrow. Today is the seed time. Now are the hours of work, and tomorrow comes the harvest and the playtime. Our chalice lighting this morning comes from Don Shea Cooley. We light our chalice this morning, grateful for the love that we experience in this beloved community. May the flame light the way for all who seek such abundance. Let us join together in our spoken affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. Our opening thought comes from Wendell Berry from his writing, Eating. Eating with the fullest pleasure, pleasure that does not depend on ignorance, is perhaps the profoundest enactment of our connection with the world. In this pleasure, we experience and celebrate our dependence and our gratitude, for we are living from mystery, from creatures we did not make and powers we cannot comprehend. Our next reading comes from Patrice Kahn-Coulors from her writing, When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir. Being hungry is the hardest thing. And to this day, I have prayers of gratitude for the Black Panthers, who made breakfast for children a thing that schools should do. We qualified for free lunch and breakfast, and without them, I am almost sure we wouldn't have made it out of childhood alive, despite my hardworking parents. Our meditation this morning comes from Andre Moll. All that we share is sacred. As we gather together, may we remember, when you share with me what is most important to you, that is where listening begins. When I show you that I hear you, when I say your life matters, that is where compassion begins. When I open the door to greet you, that is where hospitality begins. When I venture out to bring you to shelter, that is where love begins. When I risk my comfort to ease your suffering, when I act against hatred, violence, and injustice, that is where courage begins. When we experience the full presence of each other because of our shared humanity, because of our differences, that is where holy gratitude begins. May this space be a table that is not complete until all are welcome. May this table be a space of beauty where together we create a series of miracles and where all that we share is sacred. May it be so.
Be lamps unto yourselves, be your confidence. Hold to the truth within yourselves, as to the only lamp.
Our next reading is from the diary of Anne Frank. She writes, "Hunger is not a problem, it is an obscenity. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." During the spring semester at Oklahoma City University, I taught a course that I have offered on 5 other occasions that is titled Food Ethics. In the course, we look at the ethical issues related to food systems. We look at food production, distribution, and consumption. We study issues of health, safety, and nutrition. We look at the problem of hunger. We compare and contrast industrial agriculture with agroecology, permaculture, and organic farming. We study the ecological impact of agriculture, and we look at issues of animal welfare. We study economic and political aspects of our food system that tend to subsidize and support industrial agriculture to the detriment of the land, animals, and people. I also have the students engage in service learning, where they have an opportunity to take what they're learning in the food ethics class and apply it through service in a community-based setting, and then have an opportunity for academic reflection. In the food ethics class that I teach, we partner with the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma and with Commonwealth Urban Farms, a community-based garden that is close to campus. The course tends to be one of the more popular courses that I teach, perhaps partly because it covers a topic that affects us all. Without food, we cannot live. Without enough food, we cannot live well. And without the right kind of food that is good for our health, we cannot fully flourish as we otherwise might be able to. There is more to life than food, and as my dad often says, we should eat to live rather than live to eat, but our lives and our food are inextricably mixed, and a good life is made more possible by good food. Many of my students in my food ethics classes have not taken a lot of time to think very much about where their food comes from and how it is produced. Most of them are actually shocked to learn how much of their food is processed, and they are amazed to learn how ubiquitous corn is in our diets. They also find it difficult to understand why food that is bad for us costs so little and food that is good for us costs so much. They are saddened to learn how much fossil fuel is used by the industrial agricultural system, and they are upset by the negative ecological impact of pesticides and the overuse of fertilizers that pollute our waterways and oceans. They are sickened by the revolving door between industrial food companies and the government agencies that are supposed to regulate our food systems for the well-being of us all, but that often end up focusing on the profits of industrial agriculture. This spring, my food ethics class was going along pretty much as usual until the very unusual occurrence of a global pandemic took place right in the middle of the course. And like all of my classes this spring, we had to finish the semester online and through the use of video conferencing technology. We had to get creative about our service learning projects, and the students learned what it meant to be virtual volunteers for the food bank and for the urban farm, helping to promote their work and their mission through the use of social media and online communication and education. After the pandemic began, it didn't take long for the course to take on a different and more urgent dynamic than it had during pre-pandemic times, because the pandemic was ripping off before our eyes the facade of sustainability and stability in our food systems for us to see more clearly the lack of sustainability, the lack of resilience, and the lack of justice that our current food systems exhibit. The pandemic shined a bright light on the working conditions of persons who work in industrial agriculture. It showed how complex food distribution is, as we saw crops going to waste, animals killed and discarded, and milk being poured down the drain because restaurants and school cafeterias were closed. The pandemic revealed much more clearly how vulnerable supply chains are and how essential persons are who produce, transport, distribute, and sell us our food. It showed us how vulnerable so much of our society is to food insecurity, as so many persons lost their employment, with millions of people seeking food assistance, and many of those seeking that assistance for the first time. The lines of cars at food banks brought back memories of lines of people waiting outside of soup kitchens in the economic crises of the past. And for those who eat meat, some were surprised to find their meat of choice not always stocked in the grocery store, as the slaughter factories struggled to stay open as their employees became sick with the COVID-19 virus. These changes did not go unnoticed by the students in my food ethics class as they began to reflect on some of the underlying problems of our food system. that were exposed more clearly by the pandemic. Not only was the food system problematic for human health and ecological sustainability, not only was it horrific for animal welfare, it is also not as resilient and just as many of us thought in times of national and global crisis. Many food banks are at the breaking point, struggling to feed so many who are struggling, while animals are being killed and discarded, and crops are being tilled under. The food insecurity and food injustice that were already present before the pandemic are even more painfully obvious during this time of crisis. All of this begs the question, if our industrial food system is so unhealthy, so unsustainable for the soil, so polluting of our water and air, so cruel and inhumane to animals, increasingly unsafe for humans, and less just and less resilient than envisioned by our pre-pandemic imagination, then isn't this a good time to rethink what we are doing? Our current systems are killing us and so much life on the planet. Isn't this the time to rethink food? How we grow it, how cruel our food systems are to animals, how much our food systems contribute to pollution and climate change, and how bad so much of our food is for our health. We are coming to realize that the fossil fuel companies who have been trying to convince us that our lives are lost without fossil fuels have been lying to us to maintain their economic and political power. Now is also the time for us to realize that the industrial agricultural companies that have been telling us that we can't solve world hunger without them are also not telling us the whole truth about our food and its impact on people and the planet. There are better ways, more sustainable ways, more healthy ways, more safe ways, more locally self-sufficient ways, and more resilient ways to produce and distribute our food. Perhaps during this pandemic, we can finally see this more clearly and not simply try and get back to the normal of big industrial agriculture, but rather strive for food systems that are more just, more resilient, more locally self-sufficient, and that foster both human and ecological flourishing. Amen.
Would you harbor me? Would I harbor you? Would you harbor me? Would I harbor you? Would you harbor a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a heretic, convict, or spy? Would you harbor a runaway woman or child, a poet, a prophet, a king? Would you harbor an exile or a refugee, a person living with AIDS? Would you harbor a Tubman, a Garrett, a Truth, a fugitive or a slave? Would you harbor a Haitian, Korean, or Czech, a lesbian or a gay? Would you harbor a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, a heretic, convict, or spy? you harbor a runaway woman or child, a poet, a prophet, a king? Would you harbor an exile or a refugee, a person living with AIDS? Would you harbor a tubman, a Garrett, a truth, a fugitive or a slave? Would you harbor a Haitian, Korean, or Czech, a lesbian or a gay? Would you harbor
Our parting thought is from Desmond Tutu. When people were hungry, Jesus didn't say, "Now is that political or social?" He said, "I feed you," because the good news to a hungry person is bread. Let us extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.